War Sovereign Soaring the Heavens, Chapter 792. I wonder what's the results of the battles of others. 2 people have died here, so there are another 42 people left. Duan Lingtian thought in his heart as he flew towards the distance and continued searching for his next target. Of course, he'd maintained a low profile and was careful all along the way. He rarely took the initiative to attack and mostly concealed himself at the side of the other person, and he only made a move after he noticed that the other person wasn't a threat to him. All along the next part of the way, another 3 young men had died at Duan Lingtian's hands. Amongst them was a member of the Darming dynasty that had once attacked him at the 9th floor of the Ice Flame Pavilion in Darming dynasty, and the person could be said to be an old acquaintance of his. Swish with a raise of his hand, Duan Lingtian executed the 9 dragons' radiant flash, causing 4 bloody holes penetrated by the flashes to appear on another young man before he perished. The lives of men are really lowly like weeds in this world. After he put away his opponent's spatial ring, Duan Lingtian couldn't help but sigh with emotion. Of course, Duan Lingtian knew clearly in his heart that if he encountered an existence that was stronger than him now, then his life would similarly be lowly like a blade of grass and be nothing worth mentioning. It was precisely because of this that every time Duan Lingtian attacked and killed someone, slight fear would arise in his heart. Only by standing at the peak of this work and surpassing everyone would I not have to worry that someone would trample upon me beneath their feet or take my life to be lowly like a weed. When he thought up to here, Duan Lingtian's heart of the strong became even more firmer, and his gaze that stared concentratedly into the distance became even fiercer. He wanted to become one that was strong. One that stood above everyone and stood at the peak while looking down onto the myriad of beings in the world. This was his greatest aspiration, and he wouldn't have any regrets even until his death. All along the way, Duan Lingtian obtained a certain level of understanding towards this illusory purgatory as well. It was a place that was completely constructed from inscription formations, and everything within it was an illusion. Of course, to people that were within the inscription formation, everything was no different than real things. Up until now, there were a total of 5 young geniuses of the various dynasties that had died at his hands, whereas, after the corpses of these young men fell onto the ground, all of them would strangely vanish. Duan Lingtian knew that those corpses hadn't vanished, but had instead left the illusory purgatory and appeared outside the inscription formation of this illusory realm. Just like Duan Lingtian had thought, after every short period of time, there would be a corpse that would fly out from the inscription formation that looked like a ball of mist and clouds that had converged together, and then the corpse would fall heavily on the combat arena. Every time a corpse appeared, it was cause the faces of the representatives of the various dynasties to sink. Up until now, every single dynasty had casualties, and the only difference was the amount. The corpses on the combat arena were piled up in 10 different places, and amongst them, the corpses of the Darkhan dynasty were the least, as there was only a single corpse. The person that had died was a 7th level void initiation stage martial artist that had entered the top 10 by luck during the dynasty martial competition on that day. But unfortunately, even though he'd obtained the qualifications to participate in the martial competition of the 10 dynasties, he died far away from home. Even though his cultivation had improved greatly after a year of time, it had only improved to the 8th level of the void initiation stage, and he was in existence at the bottom amongst the group of young geniuses from the 10 dynasties. This also caused him to be bound to the fate of being a prey in the first round's life and death selection in the illusory purgatory. Once a prey didn't conceal himself well, he would be bound to be hunted down and killed. Which dynasty is over there? In the sky above the combat arena, the vice fort master of Skywolf Fort, Ningkan, looked at the corpse that lay alone at the side of the combat arena. Vice Fort Master, that's a member of the Darkhan dynasty. An elder of Skywolf Fort spoke respectfully. Darkhan dynasty? The dynasty that Duan Ling Tian is from. Nang Kan's eyes lit up when he heard this. Yes. The elder nodded. Up until now, there are already 23 people that have died. Only another 21 people are required before the remaining people can pass through the first round of the selections. Nang Kan looked at the corpses that were divided into 10 areas and said slowly, if Duan Ling Tian is really capable of making it through this first round of the selections, then no matter what method he used to make it through, he has the qualifications to become my personal disciple. Even though Nang Kan's voice wasn't loud, yet it entered into the ears of everyone present. But besides the representatives of the Darkhan dynasty, the others seemed to be slightly absent-minded, and they didn't continue being envious or jealous of Duan Ling Tian. Because of the successive deaths of the young geniuses from their dynasties, the representatives of the other 9 dynasties had unsightly expressions and utterly didn't have the mood to care about anything else. Humph. A cold snort resounded out, and Sword 13 glanced at Nang Kan with disdain. Nang Kan, your face is really thick-skinned. I'll say what I said earlier, you don't have the qualifications to take Duan Ling Tian as your disciple. Sword 13, whether I have the qualifications or not isn't up to you. Nang Kan refused to show weakness and looked Sword 13 in the eyes. As far as he was concerned, if someone as respected as him, the Vice Fort Master of Skywolf Fort, wanted to take a young man from a tiny dynasty as his personal disciple, then wouldn't the young man be extremely excited as he knelt down and kowtowed before him? We'll see. Sword 13 spoke indifferently, and the space between his brows was filled with strong confidence. Martial uncle. Right at this moment, Feng Wei, who stood by Nang Kan's side, seemed to have thought of something, and he frowned before sending a voice transmission to Nang Kan. There's something I forgot to tell you. Duan Ling Tian seemed to be a good friend of Sword 13's disciple. 2 days ago, Subsequently, Feng Wei spoke of the matter about him and the Dongguo clan's patriarch, Dongguo Lei, going to look for Duan Ling Tian, including the matter about him wanting to allow Dongguo Lei to take Duan Ling Tian away, yet Sword 13 had stood out to protect Duan Ling Tian. What? Feng Wei's words caused Nang Kan's expression to be unable to help but go grim. If it wasn't for Feng Wei speaking of it now, he would be utterly unaware of this incident. Never had he imagined that their Skywolf Fort had already given Duan Ling Tian such a bad impression before this. Meanwhile, he finally realized why Sword 13 would be so confident that Duan Ling Tian wouldn't be willing to become his disciple. So it turns out that all of this has a cause and effect. You very likely kept out a rare genius martial artist for the sake of a tiny Dongguo Lei. Nang Kan's eyes contained a trace of rage as he looked at Feng Wei. Feng Wei neither agreed nor disagreed. Martial uncle, perhaps Duan Ling Tian's natural talent isn't bad. But with his age, I presume it's impossible for him to have any great accomplishments. Moreover, once he enters that place, he's bound to fall to the fate of being cannon fodder. It's utterly impossible for him to survive. So, even if you can't take him as your personal disciple, Martial uncle doesn't have to feel regretful about it, said Feng Wei. That depends on the situation at that time. If I give up like this, it would instead cause Sword 13 to look down on me. As for Duan Ling Tian, if he really isn't sensible, then he's bound to perish. As Nang Kan finished speaking via voice transmission, a cold light flashed within his eyes. Swoosh! Suddenly, another corpse flashed out from the inscription formation and plunged down from the ground before smashing heavily on the ground. Yes, Yao. The pupils of the Darkhan dynasty's emperor constricted. Even though he wasn't surprised that a second young genius of the Darkhan dynasty would be killed, yet he never imagined that the second person would be Yesiao. Yesiao was a person that was ranked in the top 10 in the dynasty martial competition at any rate, and in terms of cultivation, he seemed to be even above the emperor's son, Bai He. Presently, Yesiao even had a cultivation at the void interpretation stage, yet had still died. Of course, he thought that it was because Yesiao was unfortunate. As far as he was concerned, Suli, Long Yun, and Feng Tianwu were all weaker than Yesiao. But all three of them hadn't died, yet Yesiao had, so it was surely because Yesiao's luck wasn't good and had encountered an existence stronger than himself. If the emperor knew that Suli, Long Yun, and Feng Tianwu's strength wasn't inferior to Yesiao now, he would probably not think in this way. Tianwu. Feng Wu Dao looked at the inscription formation, and his eyes obviously contained slight worry. Even though his daughter's natural talent and strength wasn't bad, but she was facing the young experts of the various dynasties now, and there was no lack of existences that were stronger than her amongst them. Once she encountered them, she would have a slim chance of survival. I hope that kid, Ling Tian, can converge with Tianwu as soon as possible. Feng Wu Dao thought in his heart. As far as he was concerned, so long as Duan Ling Tian converged with his daughter, then his daughter would be safe. Presently, amongst the group of experts of the older generation in the sky above the combat arena, only Sword 13, Saber 5, Ning Kan, and Feng Wei were composed, whereas all the others had worried expressions. Ning Kan, Sword 13, Saber 5, and Feng Wei had disciples that were within the illusory purgatory, and the reason they were able to be so composed was undoubtedly because they were filled with confidence towards their disciples. Even though the illusory purgatory could be considered to be different than purgatory in the realm of mortals, yet it was no different to a purgatory in the realm of mortals to those weaker martial artists that encountered stronger martial artists, because their end would practically be one of death. Three figures flashed out to surround a young man that had a wine gourd hanging at his waist, and one of the blue-clothed young men sneered. Zhang Xiaoyang, enemies really are bound to meet. You, this void interpretation stage young expert of the Darkhan dynasty is probably going to die here today. It's you. The person that was surrounded was precisely Zhang Xiaoyang. Zhang Xiaoyang glanced disdainfully at the blue-clothed young man, and then his gaze descended onto the other thin young man as a trace of fear faintly flashed past his eyes. He was more or less slightly afraid of this young genius from the Darku dynasty. At that day in the restaurant outside the Skywolf Fort, he'd already met this person once, and at that time, he'd noticed how terrifying this young man was, and that this young man was probably not inferior to him in cultivation. As for the blue-clothed young man, he utterly didn't take the young man seriously. Zhang Xiaoyang, you're dead for sure today. Let's me tell you, amongst the three of us, besides me, Big Brother Kong and Big Brother Xiao are both existences at the first level of the void interpretation stage. Especially Big Brother Kong, he has even comprehended second-level void interpretation concept, so killing you is extremely easy. The blue-clothed young man laughed coldly as he looked at Zhang Xiaoyang. Second-level void interpretation concept. Zhang Xiaoyang took a deep breath, and he felt his intuition was really not wrong. This thin young man was indeed extraordinary. I hope you enjoy the video. Don't forget like, share, subscribe to channels.